Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we finally have some news on Shadow of Change and a bunch of other stuff actually. So the first thing we need to talk about is the front art, which is Yuan Bo. Yeah, the central dragon for Grand Cathay has basically been confirmed for Shadows of Change now. Which even took me by surprise because I was honestly expecting either Li Dao or the Monkey King. But I guess the story is going to be something possibly very left field. Maybe Games Workshop and Creative Assembly decided to surprise us, and it kind of feels like it, considering that Yuan Bo has been announced alongside a complete ebook going into some Cathay and lore, and I'm actually really surprised about this. I wasn't expecting new Cathay lore, or at least a big bunch of lore for a while. This has also been written by David Guymer, who is a phenomenal writer. He's done a lot of stuff for Warhammer Fantasy, so it's great to see him actually in the Warhammer setting, the true Warhammer setting again. Obviously, he's done some Age of Sigmar on 40k, but yeah, it's great to see the classics come back. The ebook itself is called Master of the Meteor Wind, and what we're going to do is we're going to read through it and we're going to stop at different places because, yeah, CA kind of hinted that there's a bunch of really big lore bits here, so I kind of want to discuss a few things. And I tell you what, I'm really excited. This is the first time we've had lore, well, a lot of lore come in since, oh god, this was the release of Warhammer 3 over a year and a half ago, more or less. So, yeah, we've got new Cathay lore. Let's start reading, right? So we're going to go page by page and just stop at anything important. Let's start with page 1. Yuan Bo knelt patiently while his hostess prepared their tea. He had come straight from the Gunpowder Road, as befitted the urgency of his journey to the northern provinces, and so was somewhat indecorously dressed in travel-stained battle armor. The heavy dingia was assembled from rectangular plates of celestial forged steel, riveted between layers of green silk and fine leather, and damasked in gold. Eyes fashioned from jade, and jet-studded the metal bands, emitting a faint luminescence independent of the paper lanterns festooning the small tea room. Segmented plates like the scaled wings of his true form flared from his shoulders, and a long green cloak with a dusty hem trailed across the tiled floor behind him. His sword, Dragon's Fang, he left in the care of the Gate Warden of Nanli. His tall helm, with its elaborate brow and stylized golden antlers, rested on the floor beside him. Okay, so we can already talk about one thing. We already know one of his special items at this point. He's got a sword called the Dragon's Fang. That might not sound too interesting to people, but then again, that might be one of the unique items, since it was fully named, that we'll see in Total War Warhammer as you get to, I don't know, rank 8, 10, or whatever. Hopefully, we might hear of a second unique item, but we're gonna have to wait. But let's continue. Like a songbird circling the great falls of Kunlan, the kettle sang. Steam rose to fill the room, misting the intricately carved rosewood panels and softening the lantern's glow. Okay, I want to stop here just one second. Big fan of David's writing. I like the scenery. Just as we get through it and we start reading through it more, it just sounds so good, and I'm really happy to get some new Warhammer Fantasy lore again. You have no idea the stupidly big smile I have on my face right now. Curtains of fine black silk rippled in the humid night air, masking the alcoves where skilled musicians played gourd flutes and plucked at pippa strings. The melody had a flowing, free-form nature that Yuan Bo did not believe he had heard before. Rises and fallers in the prominence of individual instruments accompanied swift changes in tempo, but in spite of the apparent disharmony, it was not unpleasing on the ear. Oh god, it's jazz, isn't it? Cathay and jazz. With a serene expression on her face, his hostess poured clear bubbling water from the kettle into the Gaiwan bowl. Her numinous features became clouded with steam, her brilliant white eyes dimming for a moment. Like the greater moon, Yue Yin, behind the brooding of a midwinter sky. Okay, we got to stop again. So we know the name of one of the moons of Warhammer. Again, not a very big thing, but it's little lore details like this which kind of helps, and it's something that I imagine is mentioned in the Cathay Army book that I'm so desperate to read. But let's continue. Her name was Miao Ying, the Storm Dragon, Mistress of the North. Never once blinking, she set the kettle on the table, picking up the Gaiwan and slowly poured its contents into the tea pitcher. The Storm Dragon was more properly attired for court in a long-sleeved cheongsam. A silver belt inset with a large amethyst gem encircled her hips. Her fingers were ringed, each one picked out with a different precious stone. A patterned Jingwo scarf was wound indifferently around one arm. Returning the empty Gaiwan to the table, she picked up the tea pitcher. The ebb of one movement became the flow of the next. Watching her was like watching the Jade River run its slow, unhurried course towards the sea. One by one the 2 teacups were filled before. One by one they were emptied again into the tea basin on the opposite side of the table. The steam in the air took on the sense of ginseng, goji berry and jasmine as Miao Ying picked up the tea scoop, using a pair of chopsticks to slowly draw the dried leaves into the warmed Gaiwan. Up came the kettle again, hot water trickling from the spout to awaken the tea. Okay, so I know what you guys are going to be saying. Nothing's really happened. The fact is, this is kind of world-building stuff, and it's kind of cool because, again, really nice that David is actually writing this, and it gives us some context towards just tea in general. Very similar to, you know, how modern-day China, or even China in the Middle Ages and before that, you know, tea is very important over there. It's part of their culture, so it makes sense for it to be a part of Cathayan culture too. Though that being said, since it's Miao Ying, I imagine that she's going to be a pure stick in the mud as we progress through this ebook. It's not that big. I think it's about 20 pages or so. Even then, it's not all lore, but still, let's continue into page 2. Yuan Bo watched, saying nothing as Miao Ying poured the first steep, from Gaiwan to pitcher to cups to basin. Tea was about more than mere nourishment. It was about finding tranquility and inner peace. He would not hasten it even if Qiangshi himself marched on the palace of the Dragon Emperor in Wei Jin. Miao Yin poured fresh kettle water over the awakened tea leaves, this time closing the Gaiwan lid and allowing the tea precious time to steep. With a long, tapering silver claw, she pressed the narrowest of the gaps between the Gaiwan and the lid, delicately pouring its contents into the tea pitcher and, from there, filling both teacups. Only when it was done did Miao Yin look up from her tea set to give the Jade Dragon her undivided attention. Haughty and cold, as slow to wrath as she was to affection, it was said of Miao Yin that only the Celestial Dragon Emperor, her father, had the power to make her smile. She had no smile for her brother now. I welcome you to Nan Li, Jade Dragon. I'm sorry, but like even in Warhammer settings, people are still kind of welcoming, especially even to their siblings. But I don't know, it's the whole cold and aloof thing all over again. But let's continue. With a teacup held between both hands, she raised it in ceremonial fashion to present it to Yuan Bo. Regardless of age or rank, or imagined rank as tended to be the case with Miao Ying, a guest always drank first. Yuan Bo tapped 2 fingers on the table, slightly indicating his thanks, and then with both hands accepted the offered cup. I thank you for your kind hospitality and welcome, Storm Dragon. Really, do you guys just not call each other by your sibling names? Wow. I don't know, it just sounds way too formal when you're meeting with your sibling. But let's continue. He took a sip of the tea, the rich floral aromas and the steam coming together as flavors on his tongue, and closed his eyes. The warmth traveled down his throat and spread throughout his chest. Human form, in his view, allowed for no greater pleasure than that of drinking hot tea on a cool night. A very fine tea, he said. Miao Yin might have been sculpted from ice, but he felt nonetheless that she was pleased. So tell me, brother, she said, what brings the administrator of the Celestial Court all the way to the northern provinces? Okay, so this is the end of page 2. Before we carry on, it's actually kind of nice to hear that there is some humanity in these dragons. Obviously, we know that Dragon Bro himself goes out and drinks with his buddies and the warriors and so on, but even Miao Yin, or the Jade Dragon in this case too, they enjoy tea, right? It sounds very basic, but it's still a lot of character building for these dragons. So nothing in the next page, but some artwork, kind of interesting looking still. Kind of looks like something that we'll see from the trailer. And it would be really interesting if we actually were getting trailer stills here, because, you know, kind of hinting at the future. I kind of like it either way. Love his design. Kind of like the armor. The scaling is just really, really cool. Again, this is stuff that I'm looking forward to, not only to play in Total War Warhammer, but I really hope like these characters end up being characters for the old world, especially since like, you know, the Jade design and so on, that looks like it's going to be fun to paint. Okay, so we're jumping into the next set of text, and this is kind of interesting as it mentions the Crowmen. So maybe if they're getting mentioned so much, they could potentially be like a unit or a hero in the DLC. Because seriously, I've just had a little bit of a skim through the page and it's a lot of mention of the Crowmen, so let's start talking. The Crowmen swept over the rooftops of Nanli like a dark cloud hurrying across the sky of a furtive wind. To the men and women of Nanli, fast asleep behind shuttered windows, he was a shadow, one whose passing brought bad dreams and dulled the silver of the moon. Somewhere amongst the layered eaves of the great city, a dog barked at the night. Its warning went unheeded, however, as the coming of the Onyx Crowmen bade humans to sleep, and to sleep deeply. Oh, okay, so they actually make people go to sleep. This is incredible. Again, stuff that we wanted to know. How do they sneak about? This is cool. Okay, let's continue. At the gable edge, the Crowman dropped to his haunches, his brethren tucking themselves in amongst the terracotta beasts decorating the roof ridge. Okay, we've not heard of terracotta beasts before. Possibly jade lions in the form of statues and so on? I don't know. It's been a while since jade lions were a thing in Warhammer, I think, 3rd edition, something like that. But let's continue, because we do get a lot of information here. The Onyx Crowmen were barely half the height of a Cathayan man, but they were as strange as they were terrifying. Their backward jointed legs were clad in black silk pantaloons. The instruments of silent murder glittered dully from their belts. Their man-like upper bodies were covered in black feathers. Their beaks were long and hard. Okay, so the Onyx Crowmen are very similar to, well, kind of beastmen in a style. This is really, really interesting. We've got a really good look of what they are, essentially, now. The Crowman looked over the fitfully dreaming city, his flat black eyes reflecting no light from the city's lanterns. He was not human, and the world he perceived was not the human world. He was a Feng Shi Bo, conjured from the elemental winds of Yin by shadow weavers of the Moon Empress. He saw in the 4 shades of the yin elemental winds, amber, iron, amethyst, and azure. His other senses preternaturally attuned to secrets and lies. The Onyx Crowmen were the assassins and spies of the Celestial Court. They had not been born, and they could not die. They had no compassion. They had no fear. They answered only to the Moon Empress, and, in her continuing detachment from earthly affairs, the Jade Dragon. Okay, so this is actually pretty interesting. They are conjurations. They are literal magic creatures. I guess you could even describe them in a sense as demons, really, because born from magic. This is really, really curious. I honestly can't wait to see what they look like. This is kind of cool. And obviously, again, the Moon Empress is getting detached from usual stuff as she's working on some sort of great plan with the Dragon Emperor himself. So obviously the Jade Dragon's taking over. But yeah, let's continue. They were drawn to evil sorcerers like magpies to silver. The building across them was a 3-tiered structure of hardwood and bamboo with a line of pink-leafed maples in front. Its tiled roof sloped gently into upturned eaves. The shutters on the upstairs windows had been left open to the night. With a silent call to his brethren, the Crowman threw himself from the edge. He spread his scuffed feathered wings, caught the elemental winds, and sailed across the tree-lined street with something almost akin to grace. The other Onyx Crowmen launched themselves after him, cawing in an unruly mob. No one saw, no one heard. A pair of Jade warriors walking up the street at that moment with long Qiang spears resting on their shoulders felt compelled to look aside and saw nothing. The Crowman tucked in his wings and, as the bank swallow flies at speed through the tiniest of holes to find its nest, fell in through the window. He hopped back upright, ruffling his feathers and squawking. He was in a small, sparsely furnished bedroom. The other Onyx Crowmen flapped in after him, already busy turning the tiny room upside down. They pulled drawers out of cabinets and threw their contents across the floor. They shredded clothes and curtains, pulled up floorboards, crowing noisily over the secret things they found buried in nooks, tearing them into pieces with their claws or slipping them guiltily into pockets to admire later. The room's single sleeping occupant never stirred, not until the Crowman ran a long, sharp talon across his throat. Okay, this is looking pretty cool. They're obviously going to be very good at what they do, and I'm imagining killing characters, possibly? Who knows? The fact is that they're getting mentioned so much throughout basically one page that if they don't show up in the DLC, I'm going to be very surprised and disappointed. The next page itself isn't really that big, so yeah, let's go into it. His eyes widened suddenly, his gurgle of surprise drowned beneath the ecstatic cawing of the Onyx Crowmen. The Crowman cocked his head to one side, watching with vague curiosity as a color he could not properly perceive stained the dying man's bedclothes, and the darkness of yin magic departed his soul. One of the Onyx Crowmen gave a sudden croak. The others froze in the middle of the ransacking the room and swung their beaks towards him. The crowman who had spoken turned his beaky black eyes towards whatever it was he had just sensed. The crowmen flapped their wings boisterously and cawed. Another sorcerer. It seemed that their work in Lanli was not yet done. So I'm assuming that these are going to be all Tzeentch corrupted sorcerers or something. It just kind of makes sense. I mean, it's kind of cool. So far, so good. Good story writing so far. I'm a big fan of David's work, if it wasn't very obvious. I've said it like 4 times in this video so far. So yeah, let's keep on going. More artwork. This is actually really, really cool. I think it's going to be an artwork break every few pages or so. But yeah, this is definitely a still from the trailer. This looks like it's a still from a trailer. I've got to say, it's very, very cool. You can see a bunch of different symbols up there. I think a bunch of them are actually linked up to the tech tree, maybe? I don't know. Either way, really, really interesting. I want to see this as a poster. Would be kind of nice too, wouldn't it? Alright, next page. An army of the great deceiver, Jiangqi, marches on Nanli from the west, said Yuan Bo. I have come to offer my assistance. I know how to defend my own provinces, Jade Dragon. Miao Yin smoothed down the long sleeves of her cheongsam and picked up her teacup. Her eyes were brother and sister storms in the rising cloud of steam. If my civil servants come to me in despair of calligraphy brushes in need of sharpening, then I will be sure to send word to the Jade Court of Shangwu. Holy crap! Okay, yeah, she's got some sass. That's actually not a bad thing. Well done. They gave some personality to Miao Ying. I really like that. That was really surprising. The wrath of the Storm Dragon passed over Yuan Bo like mist. He knew his siblings too well and had heard every taunt under heaven. Only the irrelevant and endlessly inventive Monkey King still had the knack of provoking him. Okay, so 2 things. Siblings fight all the time. Happens. I like that they've actually done this, because it, again, humanizes the Cathayan dragons really well. I love this very much. And the Monkey King gets hinted. So, I don't know. I don't know what's going on here. Maybe future content? Because I very much doubt that they're going to make him a legendary hero. Because, I mean, it's the Monkey King, and he's going to be something very big. But, yeah, I mean, yes, super cool so far. Is the wise stewardship of the Jade Dragon needed nowhere else in the Empire, said Miao Yin. In the south, Li Dao squabbles with the Monkey King over the mountains of heaven, as he has since the dawn of time. To the east, the elves from beyond the Jade Sea prey upon the cities of the coast, while in the west, Xiao Ming's madness deepens further with every year that passes. Be assured, Miao Yin, there is no region of the Empire that could not benefit from my stewardship. Okay, so a few things here. This is really cool. We're getting a lot of actual context for stuff. So, okay, the Monkey King and Li Dao are fighting. It's something that we're likely not going to see until a future content pack. I'm not sure if they're going to do like a Cathay versus Cathay DLC. I wouldn't really be opposed to that, because it would be kind of interesting if it's just going to be something very story heavy. And obviously they're acknowledging the fact that Lokia Felheart is in the east, so there might be more Dark Elves on the way in the future. One thing is, I feel really bad for Xiao Ming. Like, I seriously feel bad for him. Like, he's my favorite dragon so far. He's more relaxed, and they just talk badly about him, like, bro. But yeah, let's continue. Then perhaps you come to Nanli for the tea. Yuan Bo set his empty teacup on the table, the sleeves of his embroidered shirt bundling against the table edges. It is a very fine tea. Miao Yin took a considered sip, deftly changing the subject, though Yuan Bo was uncertain why. Longjiang tea grows only in the Celestial Mountains over Wingchang. It is said that only the Wuxing monks, okay, know where to pick its leaves and the secrets of its fermentations. Okay, so again, we've heard about the Wuxing monks before, so possible units? Now? Maybe in the future? Either way, I love the fact that we're getting some much needed context here and there. But let's continue. And the water, said Yuan Bo. From the mineral springs of Shanlong, good tea needs good water to rouse it. Without it, even the strongest tea will be weak and flavorless. Miao Yin gave her brother a hard look. Yuan Bo, the cuckoo dragon, she said at length. One nest is enough for other dragons, and yet he isn't satisfied with two. I must take your word on the qualities of good tea, for it has been many centuries since I've been free to venture even as far south as Wing Chong. All know you are the favorite of the celestial dragon, Yuan Bo added, soothingly. He entrusts you with a task he would give no other. With a flicker of something unknowable in her eyes, Miao Yin picked up the kettle and began preparing them both a second cup. Okay, so there's a little bit of animosity between the siblings. It could be understandable. You've been working this job for a long, long time. You've been arguing. Both or all of you probably know or think you know what's best for the realm. It's pretty interesting, but let's move on to the next page. Alright, we're moving on to the next page and we're actually getting introduced to another character. Yongwen marched the old man through the garrison's open gate and threw him from the top step. The old man's name was Chow Ho. He wore his hair in a braided queue. His long mustache was grey. He was wearing a black silk nightgown embroidered with golden dragons. He was Gate Master of Nanli, commander of all of the city's Jade Warriors, and a veteran of many wars. And Yongwen did not care. A man who could sleep while the legions of Jiangqi despoiled sacred Cathay, who could allow his garrison wither like a penjin tree starved of sun and water, deserved no such dignity. He clapped dust from his hands as the grey-haired general tumbled down the polished stone steps. He landed in a sprawled heap of similarly consequential old fools. Some had since recovered from the shock of their eviction from the garrison and were no-toeing towards the Celestial Dragon Guard, who stood with hands on hips under the high arch of the open gate. Yongwen swept his gaze across the street, his expression stern behind the fantastical draconic visage of his helmet visor. A small crowd of peasants had gathered in front of the garrison to see what was going on. Others, rubbing their eyes and yawning, leaned out of upstairs windows. One or two looked ready to rush the gates, which Yongwen conceded was to their credit. The sight of esteemed uncles being pulled out of their beds and cast into the streets rightly offended the peasants' sense of natural order. What is the meaning of? Gatemaster Chow Ho had picked himself up, dusting himself off with all the dignity of a great general, but found his hauteur faltering before Yongwen's disapproving gaze. He was an officer of the Celestial Dragon Guard. His condemnation was but one step removed from that of the Dragon Emperor himself. His eyes never wavering from the humbled Gatemaster, one hand resting lightly on the jeweled hilt of his dao, he casually raised the other. Wei Si, he barked. The Celestial Dragon Guard, so named, took one step forward, placed a scroll tied at each end with green ribbons into Yongwen's hands, and then took another step back. Yongwen broke the scroll's seal and unfurled it with a flourish. An awed murmur passed through the watching peasants. Chow Ho, his face pressed to the ground, wept as in a loud, clear voice befitting the words of the Jade Dragon, Yongwen began to read. Okay, so there's not really too much to talk about here. We're hearing possibly someone get trialed for treason? Kind of fits that? I don't know. Very, very curious. Kind of like where this is going. It's establishing multiple, possibly minor characters in Grand Cathay. Characters that we might not see in game, but we will hear about in potential lore writings, like this, for example. You know, stuff that gets introduced as fluff in books. Well, I don't know, it's kind of cool. Okay, another little bit of artwork in this page, and I'm pretty sure we've seen this art before. Again, really want this as posters, because there's a decent amount in the Warhammer merchandise store, but not really that much. I don't know, I kind of like what I'm seeing. Cathay is cool, and we've been able to see a lot of it in Total War Warhammer 3, but I feel like more artwork would also be kind of cool, you know? Alright, next page, and I'm already really excited about something here. It was not the demons approaching Nanli that troubled Yuan Bo. This close to the Warpstone Desert and Cathay's border with the uncivilized West, such things would happen. Green-skinned wolf riders from the hobgoblin Khanates would burn and pillage as far as east as Po Mei, and the Imperial Road to Wei Jin. Okay, first thing. They've mentioned the Hobgoblin Incarnates. I'm really, really excited about this. Again, they're getting a mention. This isn't the Hobgoblins that work for the Chaos Dwarfs. These are their own thing. It's its own faction. Obviously something that I've been wanting for a long, long time, and hopefully we would be able to see, not just here, but also in Warhammer the Old World, as they did get a lot of mentions in some artwork. Oh my god, it's just nice to see that they remain in canon. That's a big thing for me. But yeah, let's continue. Ogres hungry for human flesh and Cathayan gold often found their way into the northern provinces from the Mountains of Morn, and the spawn of Jiangxi to would, on occasion, spill into Cathay from the direction of Bone Pass, for the Great Bastion made the Empire's northern border an impassable barrier to their kind. Again, we kind of already knew this from that, so alright, let's continue. That the Storm Dragon herself could be present in a city so woefully underprepared, this was what troubled Yuan Bo. He waited patiently while Miao Yin refilled his teacup. "You seem unconcerned," he said, once she was finished. "Do you believe I should be? By the demons? Perhaps not. But the garrisons left empty, the guns uncrewed and unsupplied, the calls for aid unsent, and the countryside unwatched. These things should concern you." He sipped mildly at his tea. He had learned millennia ago that it was difficult to take offense at a person's words when obliged to wait on them finishing their tea. That's awesome. Or the sorcerers practicing in Nanli without the sanction of the Celestial Court. This concerns me. Miao Yin looked scornful. Perhaps the next visit for the Cuckoo Dragon should be to the High Court of Fuchao. If he hopes to find cultists of Jiangxi, then he may stand blindfolded in De Hong Square and throw a dart. Okay, so there's loads of chaotic cults everywhere, even in Grand Cathay. Again, very good to know, because a lot of early lore, when it was presented to us, it was like, oh yeah, Cathay is like the perfect place. This proves otherwise. But yeah, let's continue. Yuan Bo frowned, but said nothing. Even amongst the peasants, Miao Yin's animosity towards the eastern provinces was the basis of 100 legends, and he knew better than to take anything from it. Even so, he found her reluctance to acknowledge the threat to her own provinces strange. "Your offer of assistance is gratefully received, Jade Dragon, but it is unneeded. I must politely decline." Yuan Bo smiled serenely as he drank the last of his tea. "Then I must beg your forgiveness, Storm Dragon." The deep voice of a drum rumbled through the tea room's black silk curtains like the faraway warnings of thunder. He set down the empty teacup. "It did not occur to me that you might say no." Okay, this is pretty interesting. So, there is a lot of chaos happening across the regions, around all the different locations, and they're a little bit defensive. The dragons themselves are defensive over their own territories and might say that, yeah, well, we've got this problem, but you have it 10 times worse. It's still pretty cool. Again, humanizing the dragons a bit more. I like this. I really like this. Alright, we're on page 11 now. We're about halfway through and there's still quite a bit to go. The army of Nanli marched west across the country. Rank after rank of peasant spearmen in hemp clothing and bamboo hats churned the green paddy fields to muddy bogs. Archers waded behind. Lightly armored horsemen rode at the flanks, the horses swatting at dragonflies with their tails. A few units of Jade Warriors and Celestial Dragon Guard glittered amidst the homespun and the muck. But for the most part, this was a peasant army, drawn entirely from the populace of Nanli. That the Jade Dragon had been able to raise so many in so short a time was an astounding organizational feat, irrespective of the average soldier's quality. In his lord's absence, the leadership fell to Jingyi Bo, Shugengan Lord General of Shilong, proud son of the Jade Dragon's half-human descendants. Okay, so we actually have some far-off descendant in the Jade Dragon's line. Pretty interesting here. I don't know if that would be warranting enough for a legendary hero, though. I don't know. It sounds like he's going to have a part to play in this book as a whole, but not really that big of a role in lore, per se. But yeah, let's move on. He was unsure which was the greater honor, to be led by the Jade Dragon in battle, or to command in his stead. He rode to battle on a Cathayan warhorse alongside the Shangju war drum of Shangwu, the big wheeled carriage drawn by a pair of magnificently caparisoned oxen. Yeah, my cat just decided to jump on the table. Okay, that's very specific. That's very, very specific. Maybe a new unit? kind of like, well, we had war drums in Three Kingdoms, but those were on elephants, possibly taking the same type of idea, but having it pulled by oxen, because we already have some stuff pulled by oxen for Grand Cathay. I mean, it kind of sounds like it, right? Let's continue. The high vantage afforded him an unimpeded view of what would soon become their battlefield. Partially flooded rice paddies stretched as far as the eye could see, with a lot of lag too, I'm imagining, since that hasn't been fixed just yet. Sorry. Neatly partitioned by irrigation channels and dotted with peasant huts. The enemy was not visible yet, but Jingyi Bo's dragon blood could sense their closeness, the way some animals felt foreboding at the time of a coming storm. If he looked long enough, he was certain he could see a faint smudge of ethereal blue over the western horizon, a giddy flicker of unnatural pink lightning. It would not be long now. Jingyi Bo signaled to the crew of the Zhangyu war drum to sound the order to form the battle lines. The Jade Dragon had performed a mighty feat in putting this army into the field. All Jingyi Bo had to do was lead them to victory. The Jade Dragon demanded nothing less. Yeah, I'm pretty certain this war drum thing is going to be a new unit. It just kind of makes sense. I don't know. It really, really does make sense. Maybe I'm wrong here, but why would you put emphasis on something completely new? It sounds like a war unit. Well, it is a war unit. We can hear it here. Well, read it here in the book. This sounds pretty interesting. Honestly, it sounds really, really cool. But let's continue on. And surprise, surprise, we actually have artwork of the Onyx Crowmen. Well, I'm assuming it is because it does have the same features that have been described. Looks a little small, don't they? Huh. Really curious to see how they're actually going to work on the battlefield. Very, very cool, though. And this is near Kislev, actually. Yeah, this is near Kislev. Yeah, I've just realized. Okay, I wonder where he is. We're going to have to read on. Let's go on. As you can tell, I'm actually having a lot of fun reading through this. It's very rare for us to get new lore for Warhammer Fantasy. Okay, we're on page 13 now. Oblivious to the fluttering heartbeat of the war drums and to the disharmony it was inflicting on the musicians in their curtained alcoves, Miao Yin poured them both a third cup of tea. The water began to run clear, and with a frown, she set the gaiwan back on the table. This was the cue for the polite guests to leave, and knowing how his sister loathed putting on a cheongsam and playing hostess, Yuan Bo made to stand. But Miao Yin preempted him, adding a pinch of fresh tea leaves and stirring them into the water with her chopsticks. "Stay," she said. "I insist." She topped up cup with dark red liquid. "You have not yet finished your tea." Yuan Bo narrowed his eyes. It was unlike Miao Yin to abstain from battle, or to be so considerate a hostess. Yuan Bo had not expected Nan Li to welcome his help. His sister was too proud for that, but he could not help but feel as though she was now deliberately keeping him from the battlefield. Had she also been responsible for running down the garrison and allowing Val cults to prosper unchecked within her walls? Who else but a dragon, he wondered, had the authority to force a great city into meekly accepting its damnation? The only question he could not answer was why. As Miao Yin finished refilling his teacup, Yuan Bo tapped his finger on the table to indicate his thanks. She cupped her own teacup in both hands and raised it to her lips, the hint of a smile in her changing, storm-white eyes. Keeping his own expression blank, Yuan Bo sipped calmly at his tea. He had been starting to suspect, but now he was certain. He set down his teacup, smoothing dry his black moustache under his fingers. "You are not Miao Yin." She glared at him in cold fury, but then, in place of a denial, her lips parted for a bitter half-smile. An iridescent shimmer rolled ahead of it, turning the cold alabaster skin of her face to a chromatic feathers, and then back again. It was that insufferable tea ceremony, wasn't it? The voice of Miao Yin, but in every other aspect of her tone and demeanor, she had become a stranger wearing her skin. A tea leaf out of place? Inadequate solemnity in returning the pitcher to its place on the table? Yuan Bo shook his head. Then what? Your performance was perfect, but you neglected to attend to mine. Yuan Bo tapped his middle and index finger on the table. This is how I thanked you for the first cup of tea. And this, he curled in his middle finger and repeated the gesture with just one, is how I thanked you just now. This is how one thanks a tea host of lower station to oneself. The real Storm Dragon of Nangao would never allow such an insult in her pride. The thing that had been Miao Yin sighed. Okay, yeah. So I'm pretty certain this is a changeling, but really, really cool. Oh my god. It's quite a nice little thing. Use a ceremonial thing, and if the other person doesn't really do it in the same way, or someone does it wrong, this is how you can find an imposter. Yeah, this is great. I love this. This is awesome. Great writing here. Also proves that even the Cathayan dragons can be mimicked. That's something massive. I was bored of this shape anyway. With a snarl, she hurled her full teacup at Yuan Bo. He passed his hand across him and uttered a single syllable of power. The teacup vanished into thin air before it struck him, reappearing from the exact same spot a moment later, only this time flying in the opposite direction. Miao Ying casually ducked her head to one side, and the teacup sailed past, smashing on the tiled floor. The musicians abruptly stopped playing. Their piece ended on a similarly brash and obtrusive note. Not bad for an old man, but the next thing I throw won't be a teacup. Yuan Bo quietly set down his own empty cup down. The royal tea set of Nanli had been old when the gods worshipped in the West were still young. Every piece was priceless. Do not think me old because it pleases me to be wise. Miao Ying gave a snarl and threw out her hand, blue fire spraying across the table from her fingertips. Yuan Bo extinguished it with a gesture, incanting an arcane phrase under his breath and retaliating with a flurry of ice that Miao Ying transformed into a shower of rainbows with a flick of the hand and patter of easy laughter. It would seem we are well matched in magic. To you, perhaps. Let's see if we can make things interesting. Miao Ying clapped her hands, and the tea room musicians stepped out from behind their curtains. Men and women alike were garbed in silvery blue hanfu, their finery shifting in shape and color as they moved, adopting new forms for every different aspect of light and circumstance. Golden bird masks concealed their faces. All of them bore the unblinking, flame-wreathed eye of Qiangxi somewhere on their person, be it in the form of a clasp, a brooch, a ring, or a tattoo on the back of the hand. And in place of their gourd floats and pippa, they had picked up a short dao and crossbows. Yuan Bo smiled. You think this makes it even? I believe the word I used was interesting. Well then, said Yuan Bo, bowing to the circle of human cultists to thank them for their playing, pulling out the creases from his sleeves. As it is an amusement rather than fairness you seek. In a flash, he was up onto his feet and over the table with such alacrity that he could have only moved himself with magic, but in truth it was just speed. The table collapsed behind him, sawn in half by his passage, crushing the entire precious tea set as his beringed knuckles connected with Miao Ying's jaw. While she reeled, the cultist swept in. Well, big boom there, right? I mean, he's fast. Shame about the tea set, though. But yeah, it's good to see that he's not that boring. One thing is when he was originally discussed, Andy Hall did that interview thing and discussed the dragons from what we know. It got a little bit like, well, he sounds boring, but this makes him sound a little bit more interesting. This makes him sound like an actual fighter. So I'm happy with what we've seen here. A woman loosed the crossbow. Yuan Bo turned deftly, catching the iron bolt as it flew past and evading the downward stroke of a cultist dao as he did so. Then he shifted his weight onto the ball of his leading foot, rising like a crane into a half turn, and stabbed the bolt into the side of the swordsman's neck. Blood bubbled up from the mortal's mouth. Yuan Bo cannoned him back into the crossbow women with an open-handed strike to the breastbone, leaving them both in a bloody sprawl at the far end of the tea room. A second cultist rushed at Yuan Bo from the left, his blow turning into a stumble as blade passed through the empty air where a dragon was supposed to have been. Yuan Bo flashed back across the wreckage of the tea table. He bent down on one knee, unhurried, and retrieved his antlered helm. He pulled it on over his head as he stood. The cultists rallied together on the other side of the ruined table. They eyed him with well-earned, if belated, fear. Yuan Bo turned his attention to Miao Yin, who was massaging her wounded jaw. The humans were beneath his contempt. Who are you, demon? Are you saying you don't recognize me? Yuan Bo spread her arms. tessellating bands of steel reaching around her chest. Her white hair shortened and darkened, drawing itself up into a bun. Her features became wind-ravaged. A forked beard sprouted from her chin and extended all the way down her armored chest. Zhao Ming the Iron Dragon stood before Yuan Bo in her place, his arms out wide, his eyes glowing like coal embers buried in pits of sand. You don't recognize your own brother. Enough of these games. Is this the correct way to address your better? The demon's form shifted again, shedding some of its newly acquired stature and once again becoming female. She wore a porcelain mask divided into yin and yang, an aqueous luminescence shining through the pale skin beneath. Her hair flowed strangely, tumbling over her shoulders and down her back like water through the many stages of a river. And like the rivers of Cathay, each strand had its own length, color, and character. Strangest of all were her eyes. They were cold and blue and utterly dead. Yuan Bo stumbled back in shock. He had never met the first daughter of the Celestial Emperor and the Moon Empress, for she had already been slain when Yuan Bo and his still living siblings had first opened their eyes. Oh wow, it was said that she slept beneath the Dragon River, guiding the souls of the dead to the 10 courts of Shyish, under the stewardship of her ancestral monks. But he knew appearances from the peasants' fables. Oh my god, this is the Death Dragon! Wow, okay. So, wow, he can turn into stuff. How does this work? How can he turn into something that's been long dead? Or maybe the Changeling was already around by that point. Wow, I'm actually in shock. Wow. And we know what she looks like. She had both yin and yang. Well, she was the first daughter after all. Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next page. Shiyama, the spirit dragon of the underworld. Oh my god, we have a name. We have a name. This is so cool. I wonder when she died. I really do. Okay, let's continue. It should have been me, she snarled. The celestial court should have been mine, not yours. Yuan Bo shook his head furiously. Lies, all lies. This was no more Shiyama than it was Zhao Ming or Miao Yin before him. He clenched his fists by his side and roared. Beams of blue-white azurite energies pierced his flesh as the might of the meteor wind suffused the form that the Dragon Emperor had taught him to wear. The cultists recoiled from him, hands covering the eye holes in their golden bird masks as he glowed even brighter. He would show them what truth looked like. The tea house shook as the transformation took hold. The floor sagged and groaned. His body thickened, lengthened more. The magic lancing through his skin, becoming a coat of emerald scales, harder than the finest dwarf-made armor. And still he roared, his voice becoming so apocalyptically loud that the cultists fell about the room with blood streaming from their eyes and ears. The tea room's delicate partition walls snapped like rosewood matchsticks. The outer walls were made of brick and fared no better, his gargantuan body exploding from the tea house like a lizard emerging fully grown from an egg. The cultists stood no chance at all. Their bodies were ground to pulpy smears of blood and skin and gold, thrown out onto the street with no greater consideration or ceremony than the rubble of the tea house that went with them. Yuan Bo drew a deep breath and let it all out in another calamitous roar, the fury of a dragon ringing loud across the rooftops of Nanli. The battle's outermost extents appeared to have made it as far as the city. Heavily armored mortal champions zipped around the tall pagodas of the administrative district on tentacled discs. Screaming flocks of furies trailed after them, harrowing the crane gunners and archers left manning the battlements and gleefully swooping down on any peasant foolish enough to be caught alone in the street. Borne aloft on the swell of his own magic, without the need for wings or spells, the Jade Dragon scoured the familiar skyline for his enemy. He saw no sign, but in the chaos of a siege, a shape-changing demon could have been anywhere as anyone. Face me, he bellowed. I will face you, Jade Dragon, but only when you expect it least. We're still having too much fun. Yuan Bo swung his colossal head around to where the voice had come from. We'll continue this in a little second because obviously we're jumping into the next section. Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that the transformation was going to be that loud that it was going to burst eardrums. It's not really represented in Total War too much. Still, very, very cool. But let's continue, because I'm actually like really invested right now. Trailing long, rope-like green mustaches, glimpsing the demon at last as it hastily tried on and discarded 100 different forms. For the duration of a fort, it was one of the howling furies. Then it was a feather, tossed this way and that on the wind, and the heat rising from the fires. A drift of smoke. A single iron ball amidst a volley of crane shot blasted into the sky. Finally, it settled on the shape of a knight of Jiangxi in mirrored armor, its head enclosed by a helmet adorned with blinking eyes. He stood upon a demonic disc that appeared to have lost its rider and saluted the jade dragon with a spear wreathed in blue fire. The disc gibbered as it turned, sweeping its demonic rider from the battlefield. Yuan Bo bunched its muscular, serpentine bulk to give chase, only to hesitate at the last. Why was this demon making it easy for him, unless its intention was still to keep him from bolstering the defenders of Nanli? Whatever mischief such a creature might cause if allowed to escape, the threat of Nanli was real, and it was before him now. With a final sky-breaking trumpet, Yuan Bo called on his fiercest agents to give chase. The Onyx Crowmen rose up from the city like smoke from a sorceress effigy consigned to the fire, crawling out of every nook and alley and silver of darkness to heed their master's call. Where they met the demonic furies of Jiangxi, the shadowy cloud broke into squalling flocks. But enough of them broke free, screeching and cawing as they flapped off in a ragged winged pursuit of the fleeing Longma. Satisfied that the Onyx Crowmen would serve the Dragon Emperor to the end, if no one else could, the Jade Dragon left the demon to the mercy of their beaks and claws and turned west. He had an army to destroy. Okay, this is actually really, really interesting. So, yeah, he can turn into a dead dragon, one that might have died long ago and he might not have seen. We have to get a little bit of context on that. And yeah, big boy dragon here. Jade Dragon looks like he's going to kick some ass, just like his brother. So I'm happy with this. Again, personality-wise is cool. Everything so far is awesome. I'm actually pleasantly shocked and just really happy. Yeah, this is great. I am so pleased. A vengeful Miao Ying arrived in Nanli 5 days after the battle's end. She marched directly from Snake Gate, where our armies had been engaged with the ever-belligerent Hung. Oh my god! Okay. Yeah, oh, sorry. I know. I'm stopping a lot here, but it's nice. Again, they are talking about the Hung. They're talking about factions which have been long lost in lore. This is fantastic. This is freaking great. So let's continue. And was, at the risk of great understatement, profoundly displeased with the manner in which her mortal officials had conducted her affairs in her stead. Her first demand on passing through the gates of a trembling Nanli was for the head of her first minister. A flurry of such demands was swift to follow, with no branch of the city's bureaucracy obscure enough to be spared her wrath. Her spree would have no doubt extended to agents of the Celestial Court too, had Yuan Bo not been there to temper her wrath. Okay, yeah, this kind of makes sense. I'd be pretty pissed too. So, yeah, pretty happy with that. Yeah. Oh, I can't believe they mentioned the Hung. I know. I shouldn't be, like, getting distracted, but it's just nice to hear about these things. Only when there were enough heads on spikes to ameliorate her unhappiness some 2 days after her return, wow, she's an angry girl, did she reluctantly accept the invitation of the Jade Dragon to join him on the battlefield. The battle was long over, but General Jingyi Bo had camped the bulk of his army there in the aftermath. Those peasants who had not drifted back to Nanli had been put to work repairing irrigation ditches and replanting rice paddies. Others were busy hammering and sawing, constructing the temporary enclosures in which Jingyi Bo was keeping his prisoners. Okay, so they're keeping prisoners. Okay, that's pretty interesting. I imagine more the Chaos Warriors than anything else. But still good to know that they will keep prisoners, possibly to interrogate them and what have you after that. Let's continue. Small units of Jade Horsemen had been combing the countryside for days, still rounding up mortal survivors from the vanquished demon host. Again, yeah, so it's the monogod faction, not just demons. This is great. I'm disappointed that it took you as long as it did to see through this imposter, said Miao Yin. This time it was Yuan Bo dressed in courtly emerald-colored robes, leaving his sister to look weathered and massive in a suit of meteoric silver armor fresh from the Great Bastion. The two dragons walked side by side through the flooded paddy, bowing the heads of the hard-working mortals like a divine wind through a field of grass. As oblivious to the sea of peasants burying their faces in the mud as she was to the ruined finery, the storm dragon went on. I expect it from servants, I do not expect it from you. She was very convincing, said Yuan Bo, and smiled at her stormy expression. In his heart, however, he remained troubled. The demon had masqueraded for weeks as a dragon and had nearly succeeded in leading a great city to its destruction. It had almost fooled him. Where had it fled to after the battle, he wondered? Whose shape had it chosen to wear? The Onyx Crowmen had pursued it, not north or west, but east, towards Weijin and the very heart of Imperial Cathay. How it had slipped the sharp eyes of the Onyx Crowmen, Yuan Bo did not know, but though the Fengshi Bo could see all lies, they were incapable of speaking one of their own. The demon was gone. The thought of the discord it might sow in the central provinces filled him with a terrible unease. I am also displeased that you saw fit to enter my province uninvited, Miao Ying went on. I trust you will forgive the trespass, Yuan Bo murmured, only half attentive, as the Dragon Emperor will no doubt forgive the disaster that almost befell Nan Li. He turned to her and smiled. A modest token of contrition to the Celestial Court will, I am sure, be more than sufficient. Miao Ying pursed her lips for once, and wisely chose to say nothing. You are his favorite after all. He is sassy. I like this character. He is sassy. Sometimes you have to fight sass with sass. This is awesome. Character building here is super important, and I am so pleased with how things are turning out. Yeah, this is freaking fantastic. I am so happy with this ebook. It's one of these things. You're getting one of my favorite writers. You're getting good lore. You're getting sass. You're getting drama. You're getting a little bit of everything. I am so happy. Okay, we have some artwork of this character again, and he looks so damn cool. Yeah, this is definitely going to be one of those, if he shows up as a miniature for Old World, buying him as soon as he releases, because that looks like it would be fun to paint. That looks like it would be really fun to paint. I am so happy with this. This is freaking incredible. I know it doesn't mean a lot to you guys because you're just going to get the character and play with him in Total War, but for those in the tabletop, you're looking at him the same way I am, and you're thinking, yeah, this is going to be fun. Okay, we're on the last page now, which is kind of sad because I was kind of hoping for more, but let's read through it. They came at last to the wooden fortress that Jingyi Bo had raised over the paddy fields. The Lord General and his celestial dragon guard were outside, personally overseeing the interment of a fresh batch of captives. A gaggle of Onyx Crowmen had perched on the walls and were watching. Jingyi Bo gets so many mentions, I'm starting to think he might be some sort of legendary hero, actually, which I wouldn't be opposed to, but it would be nice to know a little bit more too. But let's continue. Death, they seemed to croak, in the words that only Yuan Bo had the trust of the Moon Empress to hear and understand. Death, death, death. The beaten men had been strung together in a long line, their hands bound with coarse rope. Many were still clad in their foul armor, despite the best efforts of the Jade Horsemen to pry off their gauntlets and helms. The mightiest champions of Jiangxi, Yuan Bo knew, often became inseparably fused with their armor. Okay, cool, that lore stuff still remains. Interesting that they're not able to break the rope though, because they're supposed to be like really roided up. For this he was grateful. The menagerie of bizarre forms on display, even amongst the lesser servants of chaos, was disturbing enough as it was. Jingyi Bo and the Celestial Dragon Guard dropped to their knees and bowed as the two dragons approached. The Jade Warriors, holding the rope at each end of the line of captives, merely averted their eyes, obliged by their duty to remain standing. The Onyx Crowmen flapped their wings and cawed. Yuan Bo nodded up to the walls in acknowledgement. Miao Ying looked over the beaten warriors, a look of disdain on her face. It was difficult, in a land that flourished under the benign rule of its immortal dragons, to understand how men could be seduced by the worship of the dark gods. Are we going to question? A fine mist of bright red blood speckled her face. Yuan Bo's double-edged Jian, oh wow, Dragon's Fang, had come down before anyone, least of all the minion of Jiangxi, whose head had just parted from his neck, had seen it leave its sheath. The Jade Warriors and Celestial Dragon Guard proceeded to fall on the captive warriors, executing them one by one with fierce blows from halberds, swords, and spades. Yuan Bo was the Dragon Emperor's regent, first amongst a mighty brood of powerful, often fractious siblings. But he was also his executioner. Where his blade fell, it was a message from the Celestial Dragon Emperor that all who followed its foolish victim could expect the same fate. It was useful too for his brothers and sisters to be reminded that not only was he watching, but that he and Dragon's Fang might visit from time to time. Huh. Interesting. Very, very interesting. I've got a theory, but we'll talk about that another time. Let's jump on. A modest token of contrition, he reminded her. Do not forget. Miao Yin bowed her head to him, her face still splattered with blood. She had not troubled herself to wipe away. Mending and cleaning were, after all, human affairs. Yes, Jade Dragon. She's scared of him. She's freaking scared of him. Wow. Yeah, wow. She knows that he has a lot more command. That is shocking. I've got a few theories, but I'm going to collect my thoughts. Oh my god. Yeah, this was phenomenal. This was fantastic. This was exactly what we need to hype up not only a DLC, but to hype up Cathay as a faction. Wow. This was fantastic. I am so happy with what we've had. This is a fantastic book. You guys should already be able to download it, by the way, through Total War Access. You just need a CA account. Wow. Wow. I think this is a great way to hype up a DLC. What do you guys think about this? Because, yeah, this is great. This is honestly great. I'm happy. I am super, super happy. It's been a lot of Pharaoh at the time, and it's not been great, let's be honest. But this is definitely going to hype people up. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I'm really curious to see what you guys think about this. And I'll see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.